Danger Dolan. We all have that zone we just can't stand to level in, some for personal reasons, others because they're clearly abysmal or even somewhat incomplete. In this list I will not be counting down non-content zones like Moonglade or Deadwind Pass, as they're not technically leveling zones. Now, in the lead up to Wall of the Draenor and the Outland reimagining, let's highlight 10 of the worst zones spanning vanilla through Mists of Pandaria, starting of course with number 10. Now, the original Thousand Needles wasn't that bad. It felt epic. There were these huge spires everywhere, there were Tauren camps, the Shimmering Flats was like a mini Desolace, and one of the quests there gave you a riding crop, which was most people's first trinket. It increased your mount speed by 3% and it was the best. So the original wasn't too bad, but the Cataclysm revamp wasn't that great. It turned into a level 40 zone that had been flooded by Deathwing during the Cataclysm cinematic. So now 90% of the zone is skipped by using a boat to get to the other side. Land quests are confined to the Spires and the side areas, i.e. the High Perch, the Twilight area, and the Pirate areas. You're basically skimming around the zone. And the points where you do go underwater for quests, it is slow and it is dull, and it makes nobody want to do Thousand Needles anymore. We can all see what they were going for in this zone, but it just didn't work. And now moving on to number 9. The Borean Tundra was always destined to get put in this list. Borean Tundra is like naming a zone Turd Mountain and expecting people to like it. The first day of the Wrath of the Lich King launch, it was impossible to complete Warsong Hold quests. It was too cramped of an area, the respawn rate in mobs was too lousy, you walk 2 meters and aggro everything in the zone. And this sums up Borean Tundra even after the launch. You had cramped caves with too many enemies like the Murloc Cave or the Kobold Cave or the Kavaldir beaches. And even though there were too many enemies, then you'd have respawn problems on quest mobs like near the Riplash Strand. Either there were too many enemies for you to handle, or there weren't enough because people were camping the area. And once again, you can't walk anywhere without aggroing 10 miles of trash in specifically the Geyser Fields. And then you have Caldara, which is just a ring of endless kill and collect quests in an ice zone. The only good part of that area was that it housed an instance and a good raid. But if you have to choose between this and Howling Fjord, always go with the Fjord. And now let's move on to number 8. Now for me personally, this Wrath Zone Zuldrak looks very nice, and it's one of my favourites aesthetically behind Oldham. And the idea of slowly making your way up 3 tiers of a Troll's Fortress for town hubs and quests, it worked well. But it was the specific quests that were irritating and abysmal and ruined the zone. Who could forget Overlord Drakuru and his Scepter of Domination, which kept you occupied for hours with very little XP to justify your time spent. It was a case of stand on the teleport platform, go up, turn into a ghoul, come back and collect some things, go back up, and back and forth like that, forever. When you finally do complete that quest chain, you go to the Argent Stand, 1 tier above that. But that is just a glorified daily quest hub to help a bunch of people do things. You go help a doctor pick out some ingredients, you go kill some spiders, it was all garbage like that. And just like with Jakuru, you just gotta go back and forth, and it takes time, and there are so many other zones that get your XP way faster. So only do this zone if you like trolls. And now let's move on to number 7. The Arathi Highlands, in the original version, it was unbalanced, right? Back in vanilla, after about level 20-25, Blizzard just abandoned you to find whatever quest you could and struggle to level up. So then you would get a quest to collect some artifacts and there'd be elementals way out of your level range patrolling the area. And before Burning Crusade in Stromgarde, it was full of elites and a complete lack of quests in the entire zone. So then in the Cataclysm revamp, they pretty much left nothing changed. They just retuned it so that the mobs weren't actually ridiculously difficult, but they left you with a total of 18 quests. So it was garbage back then and it is garbage today. There are far better alternatives these days. You can go to Stranglethorn, you can go to Stone Talon Mountain for the same level range and complete heaps of quests there because Blizzard showed those zones some love. It's a shame Arathi didn't get the same treatment. And now we move on to number 6. Hellfire Peninsula should not have been a bad zone. It had the epic Dark Portal introduction where you have demons fighting, a gigantic portal, you have surreal landscapes, a surreal skybox, and a rich lore zone. This is basically where DRAENOR was at. However, on the day of the launch, you had Alliance and Hordes starting in exactly the same place. So the day of Burning Crusade, there were just too many people. On a PvP server, they were camping the Dark Portal so no one could get in to actually start doing quests. So this led to multiple starting zones for future expansions, Wrath of the Lich King, Cataclysm, and it's only Mr. Pandaria that had the same zone but on opposite ends, so Horde starts on the north, Alliance on the south. And to wrap up, we have a comment here from Farahlon. It is massive but feels empty due to content being placed scarcely. It has tons of quests but they all follow the same grindy theme with awful drop rates. It was supposed to be epic, a zone that could provide a form of challenge to the same heroes that defeated Cthulhu back in Azeroth. Instead, the players are sent off to snatch keys from Fell Hunter droppings. In short, it is a zone of missed opportunities. And now we move on to number 5. So Dread Waste was the last leveling zone of Pandaria, and it was notoriously ill received considering everything Blizzard have learned about building zones since Vanilla WoW. To sum up all the problems, there were too many mobs everywhere, too many insecty mobs, and they respawn way too fast. There'd be a quest where you have to kill one mob, but then you aggro 4 immediately. This wouldn't be too bad, but their health is way too inflated, so it takes forever to kill anything. You'd always have insects and chittering everywhere. It was a depressing atmosphere. You had the Klaxi dailies, which were atrociously bad. But the worst part for me was the introduction. To get there, the quest assumes you know where a tiny rope is in order to slide down and start doing quests. The thing is though, I wanted to start doing quests straight away without having to follow a quest breadcrumb into the zone, and I had no idea how to get in there. Whereas back in Cataclysm, you just consulted the board in Orgrimmar or Stormwind and it would tell you exactly how to get in there. And it's also very difficult to skip Dread Wastes even if you don't like it, because it has the gear you need to get into Heroics and LFR, all of which have item level requirements now. These are all things that should have been picked up in the beta for Pandaria, but apparently not, and it's a shame. But now we move on to number 4. Oh yes, Vashj'ir. It was meant to be a testing ground for an underwater expansion, but it failed horribly. To sum up the problems, underwater combat doesn't work with a 3D hitbox. So for instance, you're trying to hit something and it is, say, below you. In order to be able to actually hit it back, you have to swim down to it, you have to face it in the exact direction, you have to keep rotating your camera to make sure you're actually standing in front of it, but it's difficult because you have to keep flipping your camera in order to be able to have any depth perception of where you are. It was just a nightmare. They also introduced that underwater walking, which turned out to not be that great, mostly because you have to swim all the way down to the ground in order to be able to use it. It's a slight speed increase, and it doesn't change the fact that you have to swim all the way down at a slow speed to get there. To walk faster, you can see you can swim back up and actually do a quest to kill some shit. Then they gave you the Seahorse, which is like, great, now I can swim fast through this incredibly huge zone. And it just makes you wish the entire zone had been reduced by at least 50% of its size. Because after all, the zone does look good, and it's a shame that it didn't work out, but if the zone is too big and the draw distance doesn't really go that far, it's hard to appreciate all of these nice, cool looking things in the distance if they are all blurry. So all these problems led to the scrapping of the raid based around Vashj'ir called Abyssal Maw. That was only after they realized that people really don't like these underwater zones, like in every game ever. And now we move on to number 3. So to start off, we have a comment from Captain Cook. The worst zone? Old Desolus, pretty much the polar opposite of the perfect Elwyn Forest. The music reflected the zone perfectly, annoying, bland, and seemingly endless. The whole zone seemed to have been textured in the blandest, boring, pigeon shit grey ever conceived. Questlines are boring, even the ones that were good ideas like choosing sides in warring centaur tribes. It's good on paper, but was executed poorly. I was happy when it got revamped, but when I went back on an alt, the old zone had left such a bad taste of shit in my mouth, I couldn't stay for long. And I believe the bad taste he's referring to, it involves a lot of traveling down endless roads, basically just to kill a few centaurs so you can travel all the way back to town to hand in your quest, and then collect an identical quest to go back and kill something else or collect something. It has some of the same problems as Zul'Drak, having to go back and forth repeatedly to do meaningless things. And yeah, even today with the Cataclysm revamp, Desolace is still pretty bland. The scenario wildlands in the center are the only major difference, and even that's just mostly kill and collect. Not to mention, Desolace's prime feature is that it is desolate. Some people like that, but now it just ends up looking like a bad spin-off of Tanaris with a bit of green. So the zone doesn't even know what it wants to be anymore, and it's still not even that great. It just goes to show that maybe there are some zones that cannot be saved no matter how much work you put into it. And now moving on to number 2. Blade's Edge Mountain. It was the leveling zone that followed Nagrand, voted the most popular raid in Warcraft, and it was a most unworthy successor. It had bad questing efficiency. Some quests would send you to a certain location, and then another quest would send you to the other side of the entire zone. And then those little sub-zones in the zone are divided up unnecessarily. Multiple levels that go up and down, not really visually apparent until you get there. You can't even really see on the minimap, and there are hidden paths that go up and down that you must know about already, unless you have a flying mount, and that's the only way to make it a bit less monotonous. So back then, daily quests were a bit of a new concept, and the ones in this zone were garbage, and the most frustrating one was the Simon Says, which, unless you had a photographic memory, you needed to write down notes for. There should never be a quest in the game you have to write down notes for. And one last thing to say about Blade's Edge Mountain, I hope you like killing ogres. A lot of ogres. But now let's move on to number 1. So there has always been one major problem about Silithus that makes it the worst zone above all others without question. It has never been completed. When this zone was introduced in vanilla, it was basically just unfinished. They just couldn't be bothered going in and putting in quests. A lot of the mobs there didn't even have loot tables. Quests were basically non-existent, and it just served as a random place in front of Encourage. It was only late in vanilla that they had more quests put in, they had a town added, and even then it was still garbage and borderline useless to level in. So then Cataclysm came along and overhauled almost every leveling zone, except Silithus, which was essentially untouched, and it even included a portal straight to Blasted Lands, as if Blizzard was saying, guys, this zone is clearly shithouse, here's a way to get out. The quests that are there led you into insect caves that ran all underneath Silithus. The quests actually awarded bear experience, and they confused you with passages that go nowhere underground, you get lost, and then threw insect mobs at you in an endless wave. So this is the zone that Blizzard forgot, and it should be avoided by you and all of your family at all costs. It is a bad zone, it is an incomplete zone, and nobody likes it, unless you are just a rebel. That is it for this top 10 list. If you'd like to suggest another top 10, head on over to reddit.com/r/thedDguides. Have a good one.